All right, it's 1 o'clock. We're going to get started. So I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for attending this afternoon. I know at least where I am, it's a little balmy, so thank you for getting through the heat with us. My name is Kristin Doeberl. I am a partner at the law firm of Verrill, Verrill and Dana. And I want to welcome everyone to our panel this afternoon. We have three amazing panelists with us who will introduce themselves momentarily. Our panelists being put on by and for ACC New England's DEI committee. It's sponsored by my firm Verrill. And we've titled this aptly, Does Your Organization Have Pride? Pacing Yourself on the Workplace Race to Inclusivity. And this is, again, kind of aptly being held during Pride Month. So I hope that everyone attending today will walk away from the panel with some helpful tools and tips about LGBTQ issues and implementing them in a workplace to create a more inclusive workplace culture and environment. So just a couple of housekeeping matters before we get started. We'd like to direct everyone to direct their questions to the chat function. The bottom of your screen, we'll be monitoring it throughout the presentation, but we're hoping to field those questions at the end of the presentation. So keep them coming to the extent you have them. And I also wanted to let everyone know that this panel is being recorded and that in the next few days, all of the attendees will receive an email attaching the recording, and also the email will include certification for SHRM credit. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce or have Ericka introduce herself. We have Ericka Dodge, who's the External Communications Manager with Hannaford Supermarket. We have Tony Giampetruzzi, who's the Head of Internal Communications, Engagement, and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with Hannaford Supermarkets as well. And we're also joined by Guy Pacitti, Global Leader of Inclusion and Diversity at Pegasystems. So Ericka, take it away.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Ericka Dodge. Happy Pride. It is June. And I'll start by saying I go by the pronouns she, her. And for the last nearly 3 years, I've been leading external communications for Hannaford across our 5-state geography in the Northeast. I'm also the co-chair of our LGBTQA business resource group at Hannaford. Taking the helm over from Tony. You'll hear about that in a moment. So prior to working for Hannaford, I was Vice President of Public Affairs and Government Relations for a major healthcare system in Maine. I also served as Chief of Staff in the Maine Senate and worked, fundraised for dozens, maybe dozens and dozens of local, state, and federal campaigns, and have been actively involved in community advocacy and organizations that fight on behalf of LGBTQ equality. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Tony Giampetruzzi. As you heard, I am the Head of Internal Communications, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Engagement at Hannaford. As you may have guessed, I sit in HR. They tend to pile things on as they come our way. I have been in this role or a similar role for 6 years at Hannaford, and have worked with in a similar capacity with our global company, Ahold Delhaize. Prior to that, I led internal communications at IDEX Laboratories. And previously to that, I actually worked with Ericka quite a bit on a number of campaigns that she already mentioned. And my earliest professional foray was as a journalist. I was the editor of a LGBT newspaper in Boston for about 8 years.
Great, and I am Guy Pacitti. I am the global leader of inclusion and diversity for a company called Pegasystems, which is a customer relationship management software company, 6,000 people. I am the inaugural inclusion and diversity person for the company. I joined about a year ago from IBM, where I was for 20 years, most recently heading up their diversity, equity, and inclusion learning offerings. I also spent about 5 years doing executive succession planning, and the other roles that I was in and were mostly HR, business partner, leadership roles. Thrilled to be here today.
Great, thank you guys. So before we got started with kind of the meat of the panel today, we thought it would be a good idea, to the extent people feel comfortable, and we're hoping every participant will feel comfortable. We have some polling questions that we thought would be a good way to get folks kind of grounded with the material. Think about within, the idea of this work being a marathon, not a sprint, helping folks identify kind of where they are within their organization on that journey. So we have a couple of polling questions that will pop up on the screen shortly, and we're hoping everyone will input their answers. Before we move on to the first polling question, I just want to let everyone know all of the responses are completely anonymous. Not even we will know who's answered what. And all of the results, we'll give folks about 10 seconds or so to input their answers, and then we'll see only the data shown in the aggregate, okay? So we'll start with polling question number 1 and see where folks are. So polling question number 1, does your company's official non-discrimination or equal employment opportunity policy include protections for sexual orientation and gender identity and expression? So folks can take a minute, let us know where your organization is, and then we'll see where everyone is. Unmute there. All right, looks like about half policies cover both, and then there's a breakdown down below that. All right, let's move to the second polling question. Does your company offer health and leave benefits to same-sex spouses and/or domestic partners? All right. Let's see what we have. Okay. Impressive. 72% of you guys responded that actually both were covered. Okay. Let's move on to the third question. This is going to address employee resource groups and affinity groups. So does your company have an officially recognized LGBTQ employee group, affinity group, or resource group? And again, the key phraseology here being officially recognized. So not kind of an informal collection or gathering of folks, but a kind of officially recognized employee resource group. Let's see. All right, this is interesting. So 36% of you responded, yes, you do, your company does. 6% saying no, and then 58%, so the majority saying no, but we have none of the above. So it's not as if there are other officially recognized groups, but not this one, but there are just no groups, period. Okay, interesting. Number 4. So this is kind of focused on leadership and training. Are your company's managers/leadership required to have training on non-discrimination as it pertains to sexual orientation and gender identity and expression? Yes, required. No, not required, but offered. No, period, or unsure. Let's see where folks line up. Okay. So 27%, that training is offered and required. 3%, no, it's not offered, it's not required, but it is offered. And the majority of folks, 45%, responding with no, there is no requirement for such training. Okay. Let's move to the next. This is gonna be asking about gender neutral bathrooms at your company's facilities. So does your company's facility or facilities include gender neutral bathrooms? All right, let's see where folks stack up here. Interesting. Split straight down the middle, 40%, 47% yes, 47% no. Interesting. 6% being unsure. All right, now we're gonna move to the final polling question. This is kind of the touchy-feely cultural question. What level of inclusivity do you think your company has in regard to the LGBTQ community? So the question, the responses are kind of intriguing to walk through. One being legally compliant, where you're satisfying the law, nothing more, nothing less, but you're compliant legally. Next option is you have basic policies and benefits in place that are above the legal requirements. Third option is we have in place some key initiatives and outreach, but would like to do more. Fourth is very inclusive. Last is unsure. All right, let's see. Okay. So we have 30% of folks responding that they're legally compliant, period. 18%, so a smaller percentage of folks saying that they do have basic policies and benefits in place that are above the legal requirements. 30% of folks saying they've put, some procedures and protocols in place, but would like to do more. And only 15% of attendees feel as though their companies are very inclusive to the LGBT community. So obviously there's work to be done here. So that's why we have Guy, Ericka, and Tony with us today to help everyone, okay? So I wanna jump right in, Ericka. There has been a lot of buzz around, quote, the business case for creating an inclusive workplace and work environment for employees. Can you tell us a little bit about what that case is from your perspective?
Sure. So I guess I would start by saying that I think the business case is twofold. Certainly if you are a consumer-facing business, your consumers are interested in what you're doing to advance DEI. And I'll talk in a minute about why that is, why perhaps now in the year 2021, this is a topic that is actually tied to dollars and profits. And that awareness isn't just for your brand, but it's also perhaps how your leaders, your brand ambassadors, and other people who are tied to your brand, what their commitment is to advancing DEI. So that's number one, and we'll revisit that. Number two, that I think encompasses all businesses, whether you're a consumer-facing business like Hannaford or not, all businesses can benefit from talent acquisition and retention. And I'm gonna pull from the headlines for those of you that still get a print New York Times, Sunday Times, top of the fold. There's an article here on the historic shift in the labor force. And in that article, while they're not explicitly talking about DEI, they are talking about how this historic shift is a power shift that's tilting away from employers and toward workers. So what does that mean? I'm probably telling you something that you all see and feel daily in your work, in your practice. But what we know is that it's harder to retain the workforce that we have. And by the way, according to this New York Times article, that's gone up 49% since the pandemic. So we know it's hard to retain, and we know it's harder to attract talent. And that too is a number that has gone up since the pandemic. So how is this connected to diversity, might be the question here. Well, here's what we know. We know that consumers and potential talent, and frankly, your current employees too, are more informed. And I apologize if you can hear my scratching dog. Poor guy has summer allergies. But frankly, we know that your current employees and certainly potential talent are more informed than they perhaps have ever been, and they're more coordinated. So that means that there's more momentum that is occurring. And most of this is a result of the easy access of social media and the started to say outweighed influence, but I think it is just the influence of social media on our culture at this point. So social media has accelerated, it's amplified social movements. It's as a result, a broader audience is reached and more impact occurs. There's that direct connect to the brand. There's no longer the barriers that used to exist before. So, the next point to this is that as a demographic block, we know that millennials and Gen Zers are demanding this alliance between their values and where they shop, where they work, and how long they'll stay at a certain employer. So millennials have the highest expectation for brands to take a stand on values. And again, that's not just about shopping power, that's also about what businesses do they want to go and work for. So recent data shows that nearly 83% of millennials want that brand or that business to align with their values. And they actively consider company values when making a purchase or where to work. And by the way, that's compared to 52% of all other US adults. So they're the workforce, more and more. So that's not to say, however, that older generations care less or are apathetic or less concerned to their values aligning with where they work or where they spend money. In fact, what we are seeing is that older generations are now trending more and more toward businesses that also align. Recently, I think we're going back to 2017, 2018, there was a major tipping point with Gen Xers who are now identifying as values-driven consumers. And today, 4 in 10 of the younger boomers tend to track on company values as opposed to 1/3 of older boomers. So we really see this movement toward certainly skewing heavy on younger generations, but even older generations are really skewing toward that alignment. So this is where dollars are spent. This is where longevity is happening or commitment and investment is happening in the workforce. So when we look at a dearth of talent and an abundance of unfilled jobs, what are we doing? What are you doing to make your place of business an employer of choice? And I believe that a big component of that is investing and committing to DEI efforts. So I'm proud to say that I work for a company that has made that commitment and has made that investment. And I can share with you today some of what we have done to get there. And I think my number one point to make in terms of how we got there and how we're continuing to improve is that it doesn't happen in a silo. Diversity isn't just one job. We do treat it very much like a business case. And we make the argument for that along the way. So what does that mean? It means that it's folded into goals and strategies. It's integrated and socialized across the business, just like our supply, work in our supply chain it has goals and strategies and tactics. DEI is just one other pillar that occurs in that way. We have made it data-driven because, as you all know, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. It doesn't exist. So it has its own metrics, and we align with that and align our goals with that, rather. But yet I will say, for all of the metrics and for all of the goals that that we have put on posters and sit in our cubicles when we're back in an actual office. Most importantly, I think, is that it's cultural. So Hannaford has created an environment where there is a diversity of ideas. It's not just about, LGBTQ diversity. It's not just about ethnic diversity. There is this idea that there is a diversity of ideas that are embraced, and that we create this safe place for those who don't understand maybe our DEI efforts. Perhaps they are actively resisting those efforts, but we want to make sure that they feel comfortable enough to at least express that discomfort and have a conversation about that. And that's not an easy environment to create, but I think one way that we go about doing that is that we prepare and we train our associates, our employees, to have these tough conversations, to really meet people where they are, to use an overused cliche, but we want to make sure that we're equipped to have those uncomfortable conversations, and frankly, those conversations are expected and they're welcomed. And I think that that sort of comes from this place of not forcing any of our DEI efforts on anyone. So I think later in this presentation, we'll be talking about pronouns starting on June 1st. To align with Pride, frankly, we rolled out the option of adding pronouns to for our retail associates on their name badges. For corporate home office associates like myself, it would be on a Zoom platform or a Teams platform in my email signature, but that was optional. And I believe that we have rolled this out and we're creating an environment, whether it's about pronouns or another aspect of DEI, that is allows people to go about doing this at their pace, and we don't force anyone to adopt that. So I guess we have a lot to cover today, but I will end by saying that perhaps the best business case is that a work environment that celebrates and values diversity provides safety. And we've spent a lot of time, certainly since the pandemic, talking about safety, talking about physical safety, but this is another kind of safety that I believe your employees will value. And it will be a work environment where they can show up and bring, what we say at Hannaford, bring their whole self to work. So when someone is feeling like they can bring their whole self and be themselves at work, they're not having to cover who they are or have that level of anxiety that somebody might find out who they are. That takes away a whole lot of energy that an employee can then turn around and focus that on their work, on their job. And again, this is strictly speaking about the business case for this, but who doesn't want to have a team full of happy coworkers and teammates? So I'll end there, Kristin, and certainly I welcome a robust conversation, questions when we get to the end to talk more about the business case.
Great, thank you, Ericka. So jumping to you, Tony, Ericka talked about this need driven by the business case to kind of align these pieces and, the why. Can you give folks an understanding about, where do they start? How do we do this? How do we create the environment that Ericka is talking about? Even if a company is saying, we know that we're not even close to where we need to be. How do we start? Where do we begin? What advice would you have, Tony?
Sure. So first of all, I'd like to just say that I think Ericka did a really great job articulating sort of the present state, and certainly in defining sort of our culture at Hannaford, which we're pretty proud of. It's kind of a tricky question, right? Because I think that you never really know exactly where you are without data and analytics, and I think that that's really the first place to start. You need to leverage some tools that are going to number one, really kind of take the temperature of your culture. Ericka talked a lot about culture. I think that's really important. So, what do your associates, your employees, your customers look like? Same with your leadership. What is the appetite for leading outside of one's comfort zone, or anathema to one's personal beliefs? And to what extent is senior leadership going to cascade that imperative down through the various other levels of leadership? What do your customers and expect? And of course, customers is a very broad term, but Ericka talked a lot about of the expectations of the marketplace. So what do your customers expect from you? And frankly, what does the workforce look like that you are attempting to attract? A add-on to what Ericka talked about is that at least, I think the most recent data that I've seen is that at least 30% of Gen Z and Gen Y people don't even identify as a gender currently. So that's just going to continue to grow and continue to bubble up. So I think that getting a good evaluation of the culture and where your current culture is, and then understanding clearly what it is that your marketplace expectations are is probably where to start. And knowing that, I think that there's nothing wrong with having a starting point, I would say. Don't ever assume that there's going to be an end point to this work. There is no finish line. There's no winning this race. And in DEI, because it's constantly changing and constantly morphing and adapting, particularly in the LGBTQ space.
Yeah, I think that was, what you and Ericka have both spoken about kind of was part of the rationale for the title of the program, and this emphasis on this work really being a marathon with no endpoint. Certainly not a sprint, and the concept of pacing in this space is so important. I think, Ericka raised a really interesting point about, some of these initiatives, at least at the beginning, being optional, that there is going to always be in any workplace a diversity of ideas. And so creating an environment where, that is okay, and having those conversations and not forcing, kind of taking your time and working on the culture underlying these initiatives, because I think to the extent that folks are able to implement over the course of time policies and procedures that kind of move the ball ahead slowly, and we'll talk about the issue of allyship being so important to this work. I think you guys raised some really fantastic points, so thank you. So I want to talk, Guy and Ericka, direct some questions to you about, Ericka, you spoke to some of Hannaford's efforts, thus far with the work continuing. And I know that Hannaford received a perfect score from HRC's Corporate Equality Index, so congratulations. And I wanted to see if you could tell us about an initiative that Hannaford has implemented that has supported your efforts in this space. One of the most meaningful ones.
Yeah, well, I will, I think I'll start with the pronoun work. It's the newest since we are in the middle of the rollout right now. But we did pilot this work at 2 of our stores prior to this rollout. So just for context, Hannaford has 183, soon to be 184 stores across the Northeast. We did this pilot at 2 stores, one in Vermont and one in New York, in Troy. And I think that was a really great way to, so, this is the pronoun work. This is you can add your pronouns to your name badge. And we didn't really know what that was going to look like. how interested would people be? If you're an ally, would you understand the need for doing so? And you know, the response has been tremendous. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't questions. And I think that success doesn't mean that people rubber stamp, right? Success means that meaningful dialogue happened, meaningful conversations happened. People were able to talk about their gender diverse children. You know, one of our associates has 2 gender diverse children, and she, so even though she's, you know, cisgender, like, she was able to talk about her kids in a way to her colleagues that she hadn't had the opportunity to do so. So we knew that we had great success at 2, but 2 stores is not 183. And again, sort of spanning a geography. So, you know, this work, for which Tony was a major leader in this work as well. So I'll want to pause in a moment for him to add. But we, as Tony mentioned, you know, you got to start at the top. You know, you have to have that buy-in from your senior leaders to see what the temperature is for them to cascade that conversation down and stand by it. And you know, again, proud to say that we've done that. We are continuing to support people. It's not a one and done. So we have an entire month's worth of activities that include everything from, you know, lunch and learn with community partners to continue the conversation. And I think this is work that we'll do all year long. You know, you mentioned our perfect score with the HRC. We're super proud of that. As you and Tony both mentioned, it isn't a sprint. There isn't an endpoint. It is constantly progressing. And this pronoun work, I guess, is another iteration of that work, because, you know, we're striving to improve, get better, be more inclusive. The landscape changes, you know, the world around us changes. I think, you know, the idea of pronouns more ubiquitously 2 years ago is a conversation that people didn't know how to have. And I'll put myself in that category. You know, I felt uncomfortable. I was confused when I would read articles and the pronoun they would be used for a singular person. And I think the more we can talk about what it is that we don't understand or what might be uncomfortable, the farther you can advance that work. So I'll stop there. I don't know if Tony has anything that he wants to add to that. And
no, I think you captured it all really well. And I think you're right. I'll talk a little bit more about the HRC measurement in a minute, I think.
Great. So let's jump to you, Guy. Not the only company in town to have done some pretty amazing things in this space. So can you share about some of the initiatives that Pegasystems has put in place that's been in this space?
Yeah, very happy to. So I'm thrilled to hear about the pronoun work at Hannaford. We actually just introduced the concept of adding your pronouns to the employee directory. And we did that similarly in alignment with Pride Month. And at the same time, introduced self-identification as a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, totally optional, as well as the opportunity to self-identify as gender non-conforming. So all of this work, we tried to align to Pride Month in recognition of the work that is going on that people typically think of as a celebratory kind of month. The other work that I have been doing is in response to recognizing that at Pega, we really needed to activate a dialogue in the company. The company has gone through more than 20% growth per year. So what I discovered when I arrived at Pega was that there is a very diverse set of employees and leaders with a comfort level with inclusion and diversity conversations, a knowledge, a very diverse knowledge of things like pronouns and all other components of diversity like covering, etc. So in one of the tactics that we created in response to activating a dialogue was created a TED Talk of the Month program, where we curated a different TED Talk for each month based upon a different topic, women, men as allies for women, intersectionality, etc. And what we've tried to do is align those TED Talks of the month to diversity and inclusion celebratory months. So for this month, for Pride Month, we have a TED Talk that's entitled The Danger of Hiding Who You Are, with Morgana Bailey from State Street. And very bravely, this woman came out on stage on a TED Talk as the speaker of a TED Talk. It was very moving and very emotional. I actually know someone who was in the audience and said that the applause was not recorded on the TED Talk. It just went on and on and on. So in addition to creating these TED Talks of the month, we also put out a conversation guide, a discussion guide for managers to use at staff meetings. These can be used at employee resource group meetings, a variety of different meetings, so that people can say, hey, watch this 10-minute TED Talk, and then be prepared to come with a conversation. And this is the really important part of the work that we do, is encouraging and inspiring people to have these conversations with each other, to go to places that may not feel comfortable, because when you go to those places that aren't comfortable is where we see growth. And activating real organizational change requires large amounts of people. So we can't do it ourselves in inclusion and diversity. It has to be structured in a way that people really engage and people influence each other.
So I'm curious, Guy, can you speak a little bit more about, and I'm just keeping track of a question that we got in the chat, and it's making me think of what you just talked about in terms of this discussion guide. What types of topics, I mean, what is contained in this discussion guide, just conceptually? Is it kind of, are they talking points to kind of facilitate difficult conversations, or kind of agendas of, you know, if you'd like to learn more, here's what we would recommend? What does it look like?
So each discussion guide is based upon the content of that month's TED Talk of the month. And at the center of inclusion is empathy and understanding how someone else feels and being aware that they may be feeling this way. So the discussion guides are really set up to encourage a conversation around that topic of that month's TED Talk, where people are coming to the table discussing their own experiences with that topic, so that people are being encouraged to share and therefore building empathy.
That's just a phenomenal idea. We have a chat from one of the attendees just sharing that this TED Talk of the Month idea is a fantastic idea. I couldn't agree more. So I wanted to touch with you both on the issue of allyship. And I'm hoping that you can each speak to the value that you see allyship bringing to this conversation and these uncomfortable conversations and shifting culture, and what you guys have each done at your respective companies, or generally have seen work in order to build allyship, to move that conversation. Ericka, do you want to speak first to that?
Sure. And if it's okay, Kristin, I think I'll try to fold in an answer to what Shannon's question that just came up. But I guess I'll start by saying that I think crucial to any of the work that you do in the DEI space is allyship. I am a cisgendered, straight woman that happens to be the co-chair of the LGBTQ business resource group. I'm in a place of privilege to be able to be in that place, right? So I know for myself, the question that I ask is, what can I do to actively support, as opposed to just being okay, just being more passive and accepting. What can I do to actively advance? And again, going back to the pronoun work for a moment, in the beginning, and when I say in the beginning, it's my beginning, when I think back to a couple of years ago and I had some discomfort with sharing my pronouns, I had to ask myself why. Why was I feeling uncomfortable? I present the way that, in a way that matches my pronouns. And I think, if I'm being honest with myself, and it's hard to admit this, but I think that initial discomfort was that I might be confused as being a part of a certain minority group, right? And, that is, I'm not proud to say that, but I think that was perhaps maybe at the root of what some of my discomfort was. Another point of discomfort was that it might be mistaken as being a political statement. And, now that my political work is in the rearview mirror, I'm trying to not have my politics be front and center when I do my work every day, or in my personal email where I also have my pronouns. And as I've gone about my work and how can I be a better ally, and I think this is sort of how we have developed allyship at Hannaford, we try to Guy's point, get to that root of compassion or empathy and understand where people are coming from. So again, when we're talking about pronouns, we all have a relationship with gender. It might not be something that we are cognizant of at any given point, but we all have a relationship with that. So what can I do to actively support that? By being an ally, it is, I'm standing in solidarity with pronouns, and I'm allowing a safe space for other people who have a different road that they're traveling down, and hopefully normalizing and making it more comfortable for them and allowing a safe place for them. So, very quickly, again, I'm using pronouns as the platform by which to talk about allyship. But I think if we look at this as a way of showing respect for one another, as a way of bringing clarity to a conversation, as a way to not make assumptions, as a way to affirm someone's identity, why not use your pronouns? For me, it's a pretty simple lift and a pretty simple way to ally myself with others.
Great. Thank you, Ericka. What about you, Guy? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, quote of the year, right? Back to this point of real change requiring large numbers of people. I think allyship plays at the center of that. There's that old adage that 20% of the people are on board with you, 20% of the people are never on board with you. Your audience is the 60% in the middle, right? My observation, and I think many well-intentioned people say, yes, I'm an ally, and don't really understand what that means, what it means to be an ally. I think people feel often that they believe others should have equal rights. Having those beliefs is not necessarily allyship. Allyship means that your presence in the room made a difference in the outcome. So one of the things that I'm just about to release at Pega the first week of July is a certified Pega Ally program, where what we've done is created an experience, 6 modules over 6 months. Some of it's self-paced learning, some of it's classroom learning, some of it's experiential learning, volunteering, those kinds of things. At the end of this experience, people will emerge as a Pega certified ally. And the hope and the aspiration is that they will come out on the other side of that experience being one of what was the 60%, moving into that group of the 20% where they can really help to make change, help to insert themselves where decisions are being made to create that much more inclusive workplace.
So Guy, let me ask you a question. This is something that is on my mind often, and Pega is a global company.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of building that, the robustness of that 20%,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do? How do you handle that movement and that work when you're dealing with folks from all around the globe that bring to the table very different cultural backgrounds, identities, thoughts? And I imagine that there may very well be pushback to that work, to participating, to truly engaging and doing the kind of reflection, if you will, that Ericka just was vulnerable enough to share with us. Folks might not all be in that place. So how do you handle the potential disconnect between those efforts and trying to share them with a company that's global in scope?
Yeah, we have 6,000 employees. About 30% of them are in the US, about 30% are in India, and the balance are all over the globe in other locations. So we truly are a global company, and the integration of awareness of cultures, religions, experiences, things even like pronouncing names, right? In a Western-centric environment, people have challenges pronouncing names from India, right? And so one of the components that is on our internal portal is, if you don't know how to say someone's name, just ask. I think oftentimes people either mispronounce someone's name, which is somewhat insensitive, or probably even more often they avoid saying someone's name, which is the most respectful and the most personal thing you can do, is to say someone's name, right? It's something that, the name we've lived for our whole life. So crossing those barriers, crossing the lines of cultural awareness, religious awareness, and other kinds of differences among us is really something which necessitates kind of a retraining of the brain. And so in the US, we often think of diversity as gender and race and sexual orientation, a few others, but inclusion and diversity is really much broader than that. It includes educational background, physical ability, appearance, and it's so broad. So once we start habituating people to what differences are and how to build empathy for those differences and how to work with that understanding, I do think it can be universal.
So Tony, I'm hoping to jump off of some of what Guy just shared and talk about this idea of socializing, kind of in an informal sense, socializing these ideas within the workplace to be so that, the taboo that sometimes exists in companies about using various buzzwords or, don't talk about that topic, it's kind of hands off, it's too charged, right? Whether it's, the initiatives and work that you guys have done at Hannaford or externally, can you talk a little bit about the importance of socializing these issues in the workplace?
Sure. It's hard to know where to start. There's a lot that goes into socializing these topics in the workplace. But I would, I really would go back to the simplest way, which is to be leader led. I think that, so I'll talk about Hannaford for a second. We have always been a fairly diverse and inclusive culture. I think that where we are right now is in the process of operationalizing our DEI efforts. We are probably more in the space of creating a culture right now of belonging, which I think is really sort of the, if there's a hierarchy, that's at the top. Creating an environment where people truly can be themselves, where, the golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated, is thrown away for the platinum rule, which is treat others how they want to be treated, which truly is what establishes an environment where people are going to not only be attracted to your organization, but want to stay and feel safe in that environment. But going back, I think that the best way to socialize a lot of this is to identify within the organization the well-intentioned people who are already leading very well, and work with them and nurture them, and help elevate their leadership capacity to a point where it becomes really, really infectious through the organization. I think that's what worked really well for us from an LGBTQ perspective. It's what has created a lot of goodwill among the workforce in terms of who wants to work at Hannaford. Of all of the various affinity groups at our company, we have more people by a factor of, I think, 6 or 7 who identify as LGBTQ than any other minority status. So it's really off the charts, and I think that it has simply been through just very openly supporting not only our associates, but also outreach to our customers. Leadership, obviously, incredibly important. And I think sort of, folding in, taking chances, being bold with the language that you use, and the things that you do. I think that, I go back to well-intentioned, that's sort of the compliance piece, right? But if you don't do that, that's going to cost you a whole lot of money. You got to tick that off first, but then, just kind of taking some chances around, I mean, bathrooms is a great example. Turn a bathroom into, a same-sex bathroom, or, a gender-neutral bathroom. And positioning it accurately, because it isn't just about LGBT people. It's about anybody who just wants to go into a bathroom and not worry about, whatever. And I could go right down with a long list of things that you could do from a tactical standpoint, but I do think that ultimately it needs to be leader-led. You need to find those pockets within the organization that are already doing it and exploit them.
Great advice. So I'm just trying to be mindful of our time, of our attendees. It's about 1:52. I was wondering whether, before we move to any Q&A we might have, whether or not I could tag each of you with sharing with our audience, kind of, if you had to leave folks with one takeaway, what would that one takeaway be? And I'm hoping for Tony, who'll go last, that your takeaways aren't stolen in advance by Ericka or Guy. So keep your fingers crossed. So Ericka, if you had to share with our audience, kind of, if you're going to do nothing else, do this, what would this be?
Well, you caught me off guard, Kristin. I think the one takeaway would be to not act in a silo and not feel like you have to accomplish this by yourself. Like, bring in a team of people from a variety of places within the business. And, in my mind, I think of treat it like a political campaign, like spread your message and go about changing hearts and minds that way.
Guy, what about you? What would be one of your biggest takeaways? And don't feel limited by one. If there are more than one, feel free to share. What would your takeaways for the audience be?
Yep, I do have one that is kind of similar to Ericka's, so I'll offer up two. One is to start at the very top every time you do something. Start at the top of the organization and then work your way down. And the other piece, and this related to that, is every time you do something, ask your audience to talk about it with their peers. We rolled out training over the past 6 months, and every time the facilitator closed the training, we asked, tell your peers, ask your peers to enroll, talk about your experience here. And I think that helps to build, a coalition. I think my second piece of advice would be to not ask the underserved to be a part of the solution. It's fine to say something like, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. But to engage certain populations, to really serve as a vehicle to solve challenges around diversity, around inclusion, is the wrong approach to really focus on the privileged to solve problems for the underserved.
And I imagine, Guy, that work really has to start with educating those members who don't self-identify as, members of that particular minority group, about language, about, what this issue means, how it looks for people, what type of experiences they may run across on their daily lives, so that there's an appreciation that this is even an issue that needs to be addressed, right?
Yes. And that becomes enlightening, and people love being enlightened.
All right, and Tony, that leaves us with you.
Yeah, I would say hire somebody to help you. I think that, this is no longer a discretionary aspect of any organization or a hobby. I think all too often people, you wouldn't add IT systems to the landscape architect's, responsibilities because all of a sudden, you need a computer system in place. So, get somebody who knows what they're doing and can really sort of shepherd the process through. I also, there's a great analogy that I love, and I think that it makes a whole lot of sense. And I'll leave that, just around DEI and belonging generally. And it goes something like this. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Equity is being able to choose your own music, and belonging is dancing like nobody else is watching. And that's really the place that you want to get to in an organization, because when people feel like they can work like nobody is going to question them or misgender them or whatever it may be, that's when you are able to establish a really great business case for all of this work.
Great. I feel like there's no possible way to upstage that analogy. So I almost think that would be a great way to close us out for today. I'm just looking at the chat history. If any folks have any questions that they have for any of the panelists, you can either feel free to submit them on the chat generally, or tag one of the panelists if there's a question specific to something he or she has shared today. We'd be happy to address those. There's one question I see here, Ericka, and I'm wondering if you can maybe field this a little bit. We have someone in the audience who, is essentially confessing that they, pronouns are a real struggle with them, for them. And, the idea of being supportive of inclusivity while also struggling with some of these concepts that we've covered today, they're not mutually exclusive, right? There are a lot of folks out there who are supportive, who want to get there, but just aren't. So can you talk a little bit about that kind of discord between those two things? I imagine that, some folks may very well feel silenced. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend, right? And so they opt out of those conversations, whether it's pronoun related or otherwise. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I like what Guy had to say about sort of the language barrier that might occur between Americans, English, and Indian names, and having discomfort with mispronouncing a name. And And I think that pronouns is a similar, or gender is a similar, an analogous topic, right? We might feel uncomfortable and afraid or reticent to misgender someone. And I guess if a mistake is made, you know, sort of the easiest thing to do is to say you're sorry and get it right. And you know, I think that and move on and just make sure that you don't do it again. You know, and so I think that pronouns for yourself, when you think about it from an allyship place, I think that it can help normalize those conversations for people who are, you know, who struggle with getting misgendered all day, every day. I know in talking to someone who has transitioned, you know, she talks about every day just being exhausted, going into meetings or walking down the street or going into the store, and the opportunities for being misgendered happen all the time, and how comforting and reassuring it is for her to sit in a meeting and have someone else identify themselves with their pronouns, because it opens the door for her to say who she is. And so again, you know, it's just a way, if we think about pronouns the way that we think about a title, Mr., Miss, Mrs., Doctor, you know, those are all ways that we clarify or better understand who somebody is. And so.
Great, yeah, and I think that that's a nice kind of reminder about, you know, one of Guy's takeaways of this work, you know, kind of not charging members who self-identify with one of these minority groups as being responsible for carrying the laboring oar on the work. You know, Ericka, to the story that you shared, you know, that work can be exhausting, even, you know, outside of the workplace space, having to deal with those issues and field them, whether they're safety related or otherwise, it can be incredibly exhausting. And so having others kind of wearing their ally hat step in and say, you know, I got you, we got you. Let's, you know, we'll take it from here, sort of thing. I think it's a nice kind of way to connect those last pieces. So I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So I think we're a couple minutes over our time, but I wanted to thank all of the attendees for registering. I hope that you enjoyed and benefited from the panelists' insights as much as I did. And I wanted to thank Ericka, Guy, and Tony so much for taking the time out of their very, very busy schedules to join us today. Thank you to ACC Northeast and the DEI committee for caring enough about this work to want to put this panel on. And also a thank you to Verrill for sponsoring and supporting today's panel as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning, all the attendees, just keep an eye out. You'll get an email over the next couple days with the recording and the certification information. All right, and with that, we'll let everyone go. Have a great rest of the day, folks.